Hi, this is the first of 3 videos on arguments for the existence of God, and it's part of my philosophy series that I'm doing on YouTube, in which I'm presenting philosophy from at least one Christian perspective that is mine. There are, of course, differing Christian views on many different subjects. There's not a single Christian perspective on probably most of the topics of philosophy. That's one of the takeaways I hope you'll have from this series, to realize that there is not a simple Christian worldview. I mean, there are elements of a Christian worldview. Obviously, Christians believe that God exists. So there are common elements of a Christian worldview. However, when we get into the level of detail, there is always going to be some disagreement among various people. Let me say, as I start these arguments for the existence of God, I don't think that we can humanly prove the existence of God. Now, since I believe God exists, I do believe that the existence of God is provable, because anything that's true, I think, is provable from a God perspective. But from a human perspective, I don't think that we have certain access to such proofs. And so it may very well be that one of these arguments or multiple of these arguments are in fact proofs. But I'm not sure that we humanly have access to certainty on such things. Well, I'll leave it at that. The first argument is, so basically what I'm trying to do in these videos is not to prove in the absolute sense, but to demonstrate the reasonableness, that it is reasonable to believe in the existence of God. Not that if you had half a brain, you'd see that there's a God. That's not my purpose. My purpose is only to show that the belief in the existence of God is a reasonable belief. That's a much more modest and limited goal for a series like this. So let's start with the cosmological argument. It is the first and one of the oldest arguments for the existence of God. And you can see the word cosmos in cosmological. Cosmos means world, or we would say universe. So it's an argument from the existence of the universe. And basically it's an argument from cause, or in the words of the sound of music, nothing comes from nothing, nothing ever could. Out of nothing, nothing comes. Ex nihil, nihil fit. Therefore, there must be a cause behind everything. That's the cosmological argument. Now, let's again say that I'm not sure if this proves the existence of a creator or not. It certainly makes the idea of a creator make sense. And that's my limited claim. It doesn't prove Trinity. It sure doesn't prove Trinity. And so this argument basically says, from my perspective, that it makes sense to say that there was a creator, because nothing comes from nothing. Okay, Thomas Aquinas in the 1200s was one of the first Christians to formulate this in any kind of a systematic way. Thomas was drawing on Islamic philosophers. Believe it or not, in the Middle Ages, there were hardcore Islamic philosophers. They were somewhat squashed soon after the time of Aristotle. I think about the year 1300. I'm not an expert on that, but Islamic philosophy was pretty much put to an end in the late Middle Ages. But the works of Aristotle actually were preserved through Muslim thinkers rather than through Christian thinkers. Plato was the bomb for Christians for most of the first 1,000 years of Christianity. And so Aristotle made his way back into Christian thinking through the Islamic philosophers and through, for example, people like Thomas Aquinas. And so these arguments for an unmoved mover, the idea that I see that everything's moving around us, stuff moves, and therefore there has to have been a first pusher, a prime mover, an unmoved mover, who is not moved himself, herself, itself, but basically, of course, Aristotle was 300s BC. He was not a Christian. He was before Christ. But Aristotle, Dante put him in limbo, I believe, or at least in the first part of hell for people who just didn't know any better. If they'd have known Christ, they'd have believed in him. I think Dante thought. Anyway, so Aristotle believed that not every things are there's change going on all the way around us. Stuff is moving, things changing. This can't go back forever, Aristotle believed. Aquinas believed. We can't have an infinite regression for eternity, where, although I suppose they didn't necessarily formulate it so much in terms of a regression. Basically, there has to be something that doesn't move. In the midst of all this moving, there has to be something that moves but is not moved. It has to stop somewhere. There has to be an ultimate cause of the moving. And this we call God, Aquinas would say. And so there's the stuff moves argument. Similar, a lot of these arguments are very similar. We see a lot of things that are caused, efficient causes. An efficient cause is the thing that actually does the pushing. Some of these are accidental causes. So let's say I push a cart that hits you and you fall down. Well, the cart is the efficient cause of you falling down. I'm the kind of cause behind the cause, as it were. So there are accidental causes, and then there are necessary causes or essential causes. And basically, Aquinas argues that there has to be an essential cause. Everything can't be an accidental cause. There has, in the hierarchy of causes, there has to be something that's on a different level of cause than just this causes this, then the dominoes falling. And this we call God, Thomas Aquinas would say. I don't like these ways of formulating it, by the way. We'll get to the next screen, which I think William Lane Craig formulates it better. There are three more arguments that Aquinas gives. He gives the five ways, the five arguments for the existence of God. I'm going to talk about forms of these in the other two lectures. The degree of perfection, for example, reminds me, it's not exactly the ontological argument that we'll talk about in the third video, but it reminds me of it. The idea that there are things in various degrees of perfection, there must be a standard, that's perfect, and this we call God. The final cause reminds me of the teleological argument, the argument from design, that there has to be something that is the ultimate reason for everything. So I'm not going to talk about those two. The idea of possibility and necessity I'll also talk about under the ontological argument. Again, these are not exactly these other arguments, but the idea here is that as I look around, I see a lot of possible beings. I'm a possible being. I'm not a necessary being. It's possible that my dad was in World War II. It's possible that he would have been killed, that my parents wouldn't have married, and that I would never have existed. I am not a necessary being. I am only a accidental being, as it were. Accidental in the philosophical sense, meaning I'm not essential. But basically, Aquinas argues that there has to be at least something that's necessary, or else it's possible that nothing would be here. And if nothing was here, then nothing would ever be here. And so there must be at least one necessary being, and this we call God. You can see all of these have a similar kind of feel to them. It's the idea that we have effects, we have stuff happening. Something has to ground all of this, Aquinas would say, and this we call God. Okay, do any of these proofs work? I'm not clear that they work without any objections. But it makes a certain sense, does it? That in a universe where everything seems to be up for grabs, what grounds this puppy? What keeps this thing? What started this thing? Well, William Lane Craig is a philosopher at Biola, or Talbot. I'm not sure whether he's the undergraduate or graduate, but he's out there in California, and of course, wandering around talking an awful lot. He's had a very, very fruitful life as a philosopher, as a Christian philosopher, an apologist. An apologist is not somebody who says, I'm sorry, although I do that a lot. I'm an apologist of that sort. William Lane Craig is an apologist who defends the faith. Plato's apology is his defense on trial. And so this is the older use of the word apology, as a defense of something. Okay, so here is his version of the cosmological argument, sometimes called the Kalam cosmological argument. Kalam doffs the hat to the Islamic philosophers who used this argument as well, even before Aquinas. So, whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore, the universe has a cause. Again, Craig probably would say that this proves the existence of God, and of course, it is a valid syllogism, meaning that its logic works. The question is whether it's a true syllogism, of course, and I believe it is true. However, I'm not sure whether it is obvious that it's true to everyone. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Well, there is a certain logic to that. It seems to be the case. The universe began to exist. This also seems to be the case. And so therefore, it would seem to be the case that the universe has a cause. I agree with that. Okay, well, like I said, this is the Kalam argument that William Lane Craig is well known for. Okay, what are some objections to the cosmological argument? What are some things that people push back on the cosmological argument for? Well, of course, there was David Hume in the 1700s, who's well known for pushing back on arguments for the existence of God, and of course many have followed him. Here is, of course, one objection. Why can't the causes go back forever? We'll see that William Lane Craig has argued that an infinite cannot exist in this universe because this universe is finite, and therefore there can't be an infinite to this universe. Now, that makes sense to me, although I don't feel like I'm in a position really to make a determination on it. So again, my point is not to say that this proves anything, simply to say that this is a one of a collection of arguments that suggest that it makes sense to believe in a creator. And of course, there's the old question, where did God come from? Now, I believe that this particular response doesn't understand what we're arguing here. Because with any of these arguments, we are suggesting that God exists outside this universe. In other words, that this universe needs a cause, and therefore there must be something outside of this universe that is the cause, and this we call God. Now, so when I say things like, I notice that in this universe, effects have causes. Therefore, there must be a great cause we call God. I'm making an argument about this universe when I say that. I'm not making any argument about the thing outside this universe that caused it. And so you can see there's a circular reasoning in this objection. I'm saying God's not in this universe in his essence. And so for you then to say, aha, but you said everything has a cause. No, that's not exactly what I said. I said everything in this universe has a cause. I don't know anything about what happens outside this universe. I have no point of reference to talk about that. And so the where did God come from response doesn't understand the argument of an ex nihilo creation. Okay, now I'm going to throw in some names here. Fred Hoyle was a physicist, an English physicist who lived in the mid 20th century. He was a champion of something called the steady state theory. You see, here this is very interesting. Very early on, after general relativity, Einstein's general relativity in 1915, very early on, even in the 1920s, I think, a priest by the name of Lemaitre argued that Einstein's equations suggested that there may have been a point of origin for everything. And of course, this was not liked by many physicists, because the idea that there was a beginning to the universe played into the hands of the cosmological argument. And someone like Fred Hoyle didn't like that at all. Einstein, I don't think, liked that. In fact, he invented a whole new part of his equation, the cosmological constant, because he didn't like it, which ironically turned out to be right. That's the thing. He beat himself up over adding this constant to his equations because he did it because he didn't like the idea of a beginning. And yet it turned out that the constant was right. And by the way, it still points to a beginning. But anyway, scientists aren't objective. None of us are. We could try. Some of us are better than others. But anyway, Fred Hoyle argued for the steady state theory, that somewhere that matter is constantly being generated in the universe. Not that it had a beginning, but that it's just stuff spewing out somewhere. This was disproven pretty much in the 1960s, and he had to basically we had to admit that there was a beginning. At least these physicists came to believe that there was a Big Bang that started it all. Stephen Hawking, who passed away recently in the last couple of years even, seems to have held some form of an oscillating Big Bang theory, from what I can tell. I'm just finishing up at long last his brief history of time. And he seems to see a kind of a boom, 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 boom kind of universe where we have the... Now, I may be misrepresenting here, but there certainly is an oscillating Big Bang theory. And as I'm reading his chapter right now on the arrow of time, he seems to think that there's going to crunch, that it's all going to crunch again. But this actually is not the case, according to the current estimates. I'll talk about that on the next slide. Of real fashion of late is the idea of a multiverse. In the idea of a multiverse, our universe is just one of perhaps an infinite number of universes that are coming into existence constantly out of some earlier or some prior reality that we don't know about. Now, of course, this is possible, but it seems to require an act of faith. In fact, I think if you're a naturalist, if you don't believe in God as a creator, this is probably where you're going to end up. You're probably going to say, well, this universe did have a creator, but it was the multiverse. Of course, we could ask the same question of the multiverse. What created the multiverse? Now, I have no point of reference to talk about other universes, really. I don't know that any of us do. But the multiverse is basically saying, yes, this universe needed to have a creator. It's just saying that it's an impersonal multiverse. It seems to me that this requires an act of faith as well. And so, again, my argument is not to prove the existence of God, but simply to say that it is plausible. And the multiverse admits the cosmological argument. Really, the multiverse is an answer to the cosmological argument. It buys the argument. It says there had to have been a creator. It's just that the multiverse option says the creator was this reality beyond our universe. And so the multiverse is a concession, as it were, to say, you know what, the cosmological argument was right all along. And so one person says the creator was God, another person says there's this infinite regression of universes out there that we have no access to, and it's purely a matter of faith, but, and so forth. And of course, there's the objection, what kind of creator does it point to? That's why natural revelation is arguments by reason and by evidence. I think, well, even Thomas Aquinas in the 1200s would admit that natural revelation does not get us fully to a Christian understanding. Natural revelation can point to some generalities about the creator, maybe. I would say that these arguments point to the plausibility of a creator, but what kind of a creator does it point to? Fair enough. It doesn't prove Trinity. For that, we're going to need a little bit of special revelation, such as Scripture and so forth. Okay, rebuttal to these objections. The Kalam argument by William Lane Craig, again, he's argued that infinity does not exist in this universe, and therefore you can't have an infinite regression of causes that goes back into eternity, as David Hume presumably would have argued. Now, is this true? I don't feel like I'm really in a position to form a conclusion on this, although I would say that the current trajectory of quantum physics is to say that space and time have atoms too, that there are atoms of space, that space does not go on infinitely, but that there is a certain finite extent to space. Now I can't prove it. Certainly there is a horizon to what we can see, but I I think most scientists would say the universe had a beginning. They would say currently about 13.1 billion years ago. And so even scientists right now are saying that there was a beginning to this puppy. By the way, I was going to say something about this infinity does not exist. What was I going to say? Well, okay, maybe it'll come to me. I'll interrupt myself if I remember. So the Big Bang. The idea of the Big Bang is that in the 1960s, I think it was 65, a background radiation was found to the cosmos. This is a radiation that is slowly dissipating, but it hasn't dissipated yet. Now, if the universe was infinitely old, then it seems like the radiation would have completely dissipated, but it hasn't. And that suggests that there was a beginning. This background radiation is thought to go back to about 380,000 years after the beginning of the creation, when the universe cooled enough for electrons to take orbit around what were then hydrogen and helium nuclei. In other words, when the universe was certain heat, it's like the electrons prior to it cooling down had way too much ice cream, and so they were bouncing off all over the place until finally the universe cooled down enough for them to settle down into certain amount of orbits, certain orbits around the hydrogen and helium nuclei. Now, when this happened, all that excess energy was released all over the universe in the form of photons. Ta-da! No, this is let there be light all over the universe simultaneously. This explosion of light, and we can measure this today. It's still out there. It's declining, and so these things point to a beginning. And if there was a beginning, then the cosmological, then Hume's objections fall away, this cosmological constant I was mentioning before, it's less than 1. So what this means is that the universe is not headed for a slow down and then crunch again, as Hawking seems to have wanted to be the case, because he was a naturalist, of course. But it seems that the universe not only is expanding, but it is accelerating in its expansion. Current estimates of physicists would say that the universe is actually headed for a big rip at the end, not a big crunch. And so again, this suggests that the universe is moving in one direction. And so the steady state theory has been shown probably not to be the case because of the Big Bang. Background radiation moves against that. And then because it is accelerating in its expansion and the cosmological constant is less than 1, it does not seem that we're going to have an oscillating Big Bang. All of these things point to there being a beginning. And if there was a beginning, we can ask the question, why did it begin? What was the cause? And this we call God. Okay, I remember what I was going to say up at the top here. Someone might object that on the quantum level, particles and antiparticles emerge all the time. In fact, Hawking used this fact to explain how black holes can evaporate. He basically posited that near the surface of a black hole, occasionally out of quantum space, can emerge, say, an electron and a positron, which is an electron is negative, a positron is a positive electron, mirror images of themselves. Or a proton, a neutrino and an antineutrino can emerge out of space. And so someone might say, well, you're wrong, Ken. We've found that on the quantum level, something can come from nothing. Well, I'm not sure, actually, that I agree with that, because there is, I'm coming to believe that there is actually a quantum structure to space, that space is not necessarily empty when we get to the subatomic level. When we get to the quantum level of space, there are these things we call fields, like the Higgs field, and so forth. And so I'm not sure that the example of a neutrino and an antineutrino coming out of the void, as it were, is an argument against the cosmological argument. Rather, it seems to me, there is an underlying energy to all of space that God created. When we say that God created the universe out of nothing, we're saying He created everything, including space itself. And so there is a Planck, what I call Planck space, where I think neutrinos and antineutrinos emerge. So I'm not sure that it is true to say that something can come out of nothing on the quantum level. Okay, there is an attribute of God that relates to all this. If God created the universe out of nothing, and again, when we say created out of nothing, we're saying he created it out of empty set. We're not saying he created it out of zero. He's saying there was not even emptiness there. That there wasn't even Planck space there. He created Planck space out of empty set, not out of zero, but that he created space itself. He not only created the universe, but he created the space in which the universe exists. Now, this suggests that God must have all power, because it's not like he's using existing power to create something. You're suggesting by faith that when God created the universe out of nothing, well, that he created it out of nothing. And therefore, he must have enough power to create what he created, right? I can't lift 300 pounds unless I'm 300 pounds strong. In the same way, if God does not have all power, he can't create all power. And so, this is the relevant attribute that relates to God as creator. Now, I'm not in any way suggesting that I have proved that there must be a God from this video. I merely wish to show that things are looking pretty good for a creator. So much so that the current naturalist option that makes the most sense is the multiverse, which itself is also an idea that is based in faith. The cosmological argument.